The Arab-Israeli War of 1973, commonly known as the October War or the Yom Kippur War, was one of the most decisive and psychologically transformative conflicts in the modern history of the Middle East. It was not merely a military confrontation between Israel on one side and Egypt and Syria on the other, but a war shaped by memory, humiliation, ambition, regional rivalry, superpower involvement, intelligence failures, nationalism, and the unresolved consequences of earlier wars. The conflict erupted on the 6th of October 1973 and ended later that month, but its political, strategic, and emotional consequences reshaped the region for decades and directly influenced later peace processes, alliances, and hostilities. The roots of the 1973 war lay deeply embedded in the outcome of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. In that conflict, Israel achieved a swift and overwhelming victory against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, capturing the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, and East Jerusalem. For Israel, the victory brought a sense of military invincibility and strategic depth. For the Arab states, particularly Egypt and Syria, it was a national catastrophe that left deep wounds in political legitimacy, military morale, and popular confidence. Arab leaders faced immense pressure to restore lost territory and dignity. United Nations Security Council Resolution 242, passed after the 1967 war, called for Israeli withdrawal from territories occupied in the conflict in exchange for peace. But disagreements over interpretation and implementation led to years of diplomatic stalemate. In Egypt, President Jamal Abdel Nasser struggled to recover from the humiliation of 1967 and launched the War of Attrition along the Suez Canal to pressure Israel militarily and psychologically. After Nasser's death in 1970, Anwar Sadat assumed power. Many initially underestimated him, but Sadat was determined to break the diplomatic deadlock and restore Egyptian sovereignty over Sinai. He believed that limited war could shatter the perception of Israeli invulnerability, force international attention, and open the door to negotiations. Syria, under President Hafez al-Assad, shared similar motivations regarding the Golan Heights, which Israel had fortified heavily since 1967. Assad sought to regain territory and strengthen Syria's regional standing. Throughout the early 1970s, Egypt and Syria coordinated their military planning in secrecy. They aimed to surprise Israel, whose intelligence services had previously excelled at early warning. Israeli doctrine relied heavily on preemptive strikes and rapid mobilization of reserves, assuming that Arab armies would not attack until they achieved overwhelming superiority. This assumption proved disastrous. Egyptian and Syrian leaders carefully masked their preparations, conducting repeated military exercises that desensitized Israeli intelligence to warning signs. Meanwhile, Israel's leadership, including Prime Minister Golda Meir and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, believed that deterrence remained strong and that Arab states would avoid war. The timing of the attack was meticulously chosen. On the 6th of October 1973, which coincided with Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Israel was at a near standstill. Many soldiers were on leave, and public life had slowed dramatically. The attack also occurred during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, lending the war symbolic significance in the Arab world. At approximately 2 p.m., Egyptian and Syrian forces launched a coordinated assault. Egyptian troops crossed the Suez Canal under massive artillery cover, breaching the Bar-Lev Line, a system of Israeli fortifications long considered nearly impregnable, using portable bridges, water cannons to erode sand embankments, and Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missiles. Egyptian forces achieved remarkable success in the initial hours. Simultaneously, Syrian forces attacked Israeli positions in the Golan Heights with overwhelming numbers of tanks and infantry. The Israeli defenses in the Golan were thin, and Syrian troops advanced rapidly, threatening to break through toward the Jordan River and northern Israel, for the first time since the founding of the state. Israel faced a genuine existential military crisis. Israeli losses in the early days were heavy, and the shock to national confidence was profound. Moshe Dayan reportedly spoke of the possibility of the destruction of the Third Temple, a phrase reflecting fears for the survival of the state. Despite the surprise and early setbacks, Israel began to recover through rapid mobilization. Effective leadership at the battlefield level and superior training in the Golan Heights Israeli armored units, though heavily outnumbered, managed to halt the Syrian advance in fierce tank battles. Within days, Israeli forces pushed the Syrians back beyond the 1967 ceasefire line and advanced toward Damascus, coming within artillery range of the Syrian capital. This reversal was aided by logistical support from the United States, which launched an airlift to resupply Israel with weapons, ammunition, and spare parts. On the southern front, the situation was more complex. Egyptian forces successfully established bridgeheads on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal and initially resisted Israeli counterattacks. Unlike in 1967, Egyptian troops were protected by dense missile defenses that limited Israeli air superiority. Israeli commanders struggled to adapt to this new reality, suffering losses in tanks and aircraft. However, after several days of intense fighting, Israeli forces under General Ariel Sharon identified a gap between the Egyptian Second and Third Armies. In a bold maneuver, Israeli troops crossed the Suez Canal westward, encircling the Egyptian Third Army and advancing toward Cairo. As the military balance shifted again, international pressure intensified. The Cold War context played a critical role in shaping the conflict. The Soviet Union supplied Egypt and Syria with arms and intelligence, while the United States backed Israel. As Israeli forces gained the upper hand, the risk of superpower confrontation grew. The Soviets reportedly considered direct intervention to save the encircled Egyptian Third Army, prompting the United States to raise its nuclear alert level. This moment marked one of the tensest episodes of the Cold War. diplomatic efforts, led by the United Nations and mediated by the United States, resulted in a ceasefire on the 22nd of October, followed by further negotiations to stabilize the situation. Although fighting continued sporadically for several days, the war effectively ended with Israel holding positions west of the Suez Canal and deep inside Syrian territory, while Egypt retained a foothold on the eastern bank of the canal. Militarily, Israel could claim eventual battlefield superiority, but politically and psychologically, the Arab states achieved important gains. For Egypt, the war restored national pride and confidence in its military. Sadat successfully demonstrated that Israel was not invincible and that force could change the diplomatic equation. This outcome strengthened his domestic position and enabled him to pursue a strategic shift toward negotiation and alignment with the United States. In the years following the war, Egypt entered into disengagement agreements with Israel and eventually signed the Camp David Accords in 1978, leading to a peace treaty in 1979 and the return of the Sinai Peninsula to Egyptian sovereignty. Syria, although failing to regain the Golan Heights, also benefited politically from the war. Assad consolidated his power and reinforced Syria's role as a frontline state in the Arab-Israeli conflict. The war entrenched Syrian hostility toward Israel and reinforced its reliance on the Soviet Union, later Russia, for military support. The Golan Heights remained under Israeli control, a source of enduring tension. For Israel, the war was a sobering experience. The initial failures shattered the myth of absolute security and exposed serious flaws in intelligence assessment and political decision-making. The Agranot Commission, established to investigate the war, criticized military and intelligence leaders and led to resignations, including that of Chief of Staff David Elazar. Although Golda Meir was initially cleared of direct responsibility, political pressure eventually led to her resignation. Israeli society emerged more cautious, divided, and questioning of its leadership. The war also had far-reaching global consequences. One of the most significant was the Arab oil embargo imposed by OPEC members against countries perceived as supporting Israel, particularly the United States and its allies. The embargo led to a dramatic rise in oil prices, triggering economic turmoil, inflation, and energy crises in the West. This event underscored the strategic importance of the Middle East and reshaped global economic and political relations. In the broader Arab world, the 1973 war became a symbol of resistance and partial redemption after years of defeat. Although Israel retained much of the territory it had captured in 1967, the war altered perceptions of power and legitimacy. It demonstrated that military stalemate, rather than decisive victory, could create opportunities for diplomacy. This shift influenced later peace initiatives and negotiations, even as conflicts continued elsewhere, particularly involving the Palestinians, whose national aspirations remained unresolved and largely marginalized during the war. The October War also marked a turning point in military doctrine. It highlighted the effectiveness of modern anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons against conventional armored and air forces, influencing military thinking worldwide. Armies began to reconsider assumptions about air superiority, armor dominance, and the importance of combined arms and electronic warfare. In historical memory, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War occupies a complex place. It is remembered in Israel as a near disaster that ultimately reaffirmed resilience, in Egypt as a victory of will and strategy that restored honor, and in Syria as a struggle that reinforced national steadfastness. It stands as a reminder that wars are not judged solely by territory gained or lost, but by their political, psychological, and strategic consequences. The legacy of the war continues to shape Middle Eastern politics. It directly paved the way for the first peace agreement between Israel and an Arab state, altered superpower engagement in the region, and influenced the balance between war and diplomacy. While it did not resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict, it transformed its dynamics, proving that even deeply entrenched hostilities could be redirected under certain conditions toward negotiation and change.